you've got going on is the 38 case ends right here, and the bullet is pointed toward this lead in the chamber, and it's going to scrape this lower portion of that bullet as it hits that lead. Plus, the axis of this bullet is not centered in the bore. Very important, critical. In using a Magnum case, which at the end of this red represents that, the bullet itself will self-align in that throat. So now it's centered with the axis of the bore here, of the barrel. So that's one reason you get better accuracy. Plus, the bullet jump in a 38 from here until it gauges the rifling is longer. The 357, of course, that jump is much shorter. Hello, Brian Pierce with the Pierce Brothers, and today we're going to talk about shooting special cartridges in Magnum chambers, and specifically, probably the most common application is the 38 special in a 357 Magnum revolver, but it also includes like 32 H&R Magnum in a 327, 44 special in a 44 mag, 45 Colt in a 454 Casull, 480 Ruger in a 475 Linebaugh. You could also probably even include the 454 Casull in the 460 Smith & Wesson. Pretty odd thought there, but again, we're talking about shooting special cartridges in Magnum chambers or shorter cases in a longer chamber. And this applies mostly to revolvers, although some of the comments will apply to rifles as well. So this is really an often asked question. Now, most manufacturers endorse it. Sure, no problem. And I must emphasize that from a safety standpoint or anything else, there's really no issues. They're almost always the special cartridge or the shorter cartridge is loaded to a lot less pressure. There's a couple things to know though. Because that case is shorter, you're going to get some buildup, carbon, leading, whatever, right in front of the case in a Magnum chamber. So there's an area there that there's going to be a buildup, and if you put a Magnum cartridge in that chamber and fire it without cleaning, it can embed that fouling into the chamber walls and make it very difficult to remove. It can also cause, when that happens, it can also cause sticky extraction. So now all of a sudden there's a surface that Magnum case is being stuck to the chamber wall and can give sticky extraction. So that's something to think about as well. So we're going to use the word house cleaning. That's a common one everybody relates to, but anytime you've been firing a special case, and we'll just do it for generic purposes in the video, we'll refer to the 38 special in a 357 chamber. Anytime you've been doing that, it's important to completely scrub and clean those chambers prior to shooting the Magnum rounds. So there are companies, I indicated that most companies do. There are companies that do not endorse shooting the special or short cases in the Magnum chambers. One of them being Freedom Arms. So you ask why? Of all guns, the Freedom Arm, man, it's incredibly strong. How can that thing be hurt with the 17.4 pH stainless heat-treated cylinders that they use on their guns? Well, here's why. If you look at one of their chambers or one of their cylinders, look down the chambers. Those chambers are beautifully finished. They're bright and shiny, and that's in part so that when you're dealing with 454 Casull pressures, which are 65,000 psi, that you don't get sticky extraction with it. So they want those chambers mirror shiny. One of the reasons those guns work so well. But what they will tell you is that shooting a special or a shorter cartridge in there, in this case like 45 Colt, that you can get some erosion on that mirror shiny chamber, and all of a sudden it's not mirror shiny anymore. So I'm going to emphasize that's probably more so with high volume shooters. But still, it can make that chamber so it's not mirror shiny anymore, and you possibly can begin to stick cases in the chamber at that point. So again, Freedom Arms does not recommend nor endorse that. So let's talk a little bit more about the science of it. One of the next biggest questions is that people often will bring up is, well, what about accuracy? Well, now I've read dozens and dozens of articles over the past 50 years on that very subject. And I've noticed that, I mean, I've seen articles where people did them in machine rests, tried to eliminate human error as much as possible. But there was kind of always one flaw with every one of them I've ever read, was that they were doing almost all their testing between 50 feet and 25 yards. Now, I will say that generally speaking, you're not going to see a big difference in accuracy at those typical handgun ranges. It just doesn't exist. But when you move out to long range, 200, 300, 400, 500 yards, that's when the difference really becomes apparent. So, and yes, what I'm saying is that if all things are equal, as in bullet, quality of the ammunition, powder type, and so forth and so on, you will see better accuracy with the Magnum chamber or cartridges fired, the Magnum cartridges fired in the Magnum chamber. Here's why. You have to excuse my very, very poor artistic workmanship here, but I kind of did this really quick right before this video to try to illustrate what we're seeing in revolvers. So if you look right here, you'll see this upper one is a diagram of a Magnum cartridge in a Magnum chamber, and there's an important factor in this is that if you look right here at this junction right here where the case ends, red being the case, where it ends in this step down in the chamber, the end of the chamber goes into what's known as the lead area of the chamber, and this is the barrel cylinder gap, by the way, and then this is the barrel. If you look at that, the bullet in a Magnum case is resting in the throat, and what that does, it elevates the nose of that cartridge just enough that it helps to align that bullet with the axis of the bore. Now, and I'm a little off subject to this, but I'm going to make the comment, and we'll cover the Keith bullets at a later date. That was one of the things that Elmer Keith Joe energetically, knowing Elmer the way I did, the way he probably best describe him, so energetically wanted was a full caliber front driving band on his bullets, and that went well into the throat area, so that bullet was self-centered in the throat and the axis of the bore, and that meant that bullet, no matter what, was going to go right dead center into that barrel. So unless the gun's out of the unless the chambers are out of alignment, which that's a whole different issue, but that was part of the reason for that design. Now you take the same bullet, you put it in a .38 special case, and you put it in a short chamber. Now the bullet is actually not in alignment with that throat, so it's actually pointed down. And what happens when that gun gets fired, that bullet is going to hit the edge of that lead that goes into the throat, and it's going to deform it or damage the bullet. Dick Casul always said a bullet will always go the direction it is first pointed. So meaning that if it's pointed off center, it's going to continue off center as it goes down that barrel, and it's going to deform the bullet. It's going to cause damage. Now I've done a lot of testing over the years on this, and I'm very, very careful at what I tell people. But I've coated bullets with ink and other things, and shot them into targets at long range, recovered them to try to determine what's going on, and you will see the damage to the bullets at that point. And so what happens in a .38 case is that bullet hits that lead, it's a little off center, as it enters the barrel, goes on down, there's going to be some yaw, maybe even a little bit of bullet tilting, and at short ranges, 50 feet to 25 yards, typically you just don't see a real change in accuracy. So, but then you go out long range, and that's where it really begins to translate into accuracy differences, accuracy changes. So, I've actually taken the identical bullets, put together ammunition in .38 special cases and .357 cases, and tested them extensively in a variety of rifles. And I'm very, very confident to say that is a true statement. I've adjusted powder charges so they were exiting the muzzle at more or less the same velocities, shot them at long range, tested them, and just categorically speaking, you'll get better accuracy in the Magnum chamber, with the Magnum cartridge in a Magnum chamber. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. Again, totally safe. House cleaning issues if you do it. The other thing that I was just going to mention, actually, that's kind of important, there's going to be some that say, well, is it okay to download the Magnum case to 38 special velocities? And the answer is, oh, absolutely. In the old days, with some of our older powders, almost all of those have been discontinued now. We dealt with what's known as powder position sensitivity. So your powder, of course, this diagram's wrong. The powder doesn't fill the case on most handgun loads. You do with certain Magnum powders and so on, but light loads not normally. So what happens is, in a Magnum case, if that powder's forward, you're going to get a higher velocity, or excuse me, you're going to get a lower velocity with the powder resting on the base of the bullet versus the powder resting on the base of the bullet. So in other words, you tip the gun up, you fire, that's the powder resting on the rear against the primer. Put the gun down and raise it, bam, and let that powder rest on the bullet, the velocity is actually going to drop. Now, the powders that were really bad about that, for the most part, are gone. Not always, not all of them, but most of them are. When we talk about modern powders that are target type powders that are typically used in that, we're going to say Hodgkin type group, accurate number 2, a lot of those powders like that that are very modern powders, it really doesn't matter. Red dot's even one, but you can put that powder anywhere you want in that bigger case. The velocities are pretty much the same. They're not position sensitive, and that's a very important part, because now you can get that bullet forward, and you can use powders that are light loads, because you know there's a lot of guys out there that are wanting to shoot a 44 mag and push a 240 or 250 grain bullet somewhere around 800, 900, 1,000 feet a second, and we're going to call that a target or a mid-range load. And there's powders out there that, man, the accuracy can be superb. So another thing too, I just kind of failed to mention a little bit, is that the special cases put the bullet further away from the barrel. So the rifling is here, and of course the forcing cone, the rifling begins here. There's more bullet jump, and that we know, proven many, many times, is detrimental to accuracy, whereas the Magnum case puts that bullet closer to the barrel, so there's less bullet jump. And that will almost across the board categorically increase accuracy. Back in the day when bullseye shooting was really popular, a lot of guys took custom guns, they'd build custom revolvers, they'd shorten the cylinders substantially, they'd put a custom barrel on that the breech end protruded back through the frame, and they were trying to shorten that bullet jump as much as possible to get maximum accuracy. And it really does work. It really does work. So, you know, again, typical yardage, typical shooters, you're not going to see a difference, a big difference anyway. There are certainly loads that, you know, a certain gun and load combination shoot well with the special cases, but categorically speaking, you will get better accuracy using Magnum rounds in Magnum chambers. So, and you don't have to worry about the house cleaning so much. It's just actually just a much better deal. So there's some thoughts on that subject for today. I hope you enjoy it. I'm sure there'll be a few questions. I hope I've covered it all. But thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on the Pierce Brothers.